Princess Valara Kethrai stood in the docking bay of her father's diplomatic vessel with her arms crossed and her violet eyes fixed on the shuttle that had just arrived. From the Terran Alliance ship, she was not happy about this arrangement. The Sirithi Dominion had requested a proper military escort for her journey to the neutral summit on Korra Station, and the humans had promised to send their best protection specialist. Valar expected a towering marine in powered armor carrying plasma weapons and covered in battle scars. What she got was Daniel Coley stepped off the shuttle wearing plain civilian clothes and a simple tactical vest that looked like it had been purchased from a common supply store. He carried no visible weapons. He wore no armor. His brown hair was cut short, but not in any military style. She recognized his face was the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, neither handsome nor ugly, just ordinary in every possible way. He looked like someone who fixed broken machines for a living, not someone trusted with the life of alien royalty. Vela turned to Lord Makari, her father's most trusted advisor, and let her displeasure show clearly on her face. The Sirithi were a tall and graceful species with iridescent skin that changed color based on their emotions. And right now, Valara's skin was shifting through shades of orange and red to broadcast her irritation to everyone in the docking bay. "This is my escort," she demanded, not bothering to lower her voice. Lord Makari shifted uncomfortably on his feet and cleared his throat before answering. "Your Highness." The Terran Alliance was very specific about this individual, he explained nervously. They insisted that he was the best choice for diplomatic protection assignments. "He looks like a cargo handler who wandered into the wrong section of the ship." Daniel Cole approached them at a calm and unhurried pace, and when he reached the princess, he offered a small bow that was respectful without being excessive. "Princess Valara," he said in a voice that was as unremarkable as his appearance, "I will be accompanying you to Korra Station for the duration of the summit." Valara used all four of her arms to express her contempt, crossing them in the traditional Sirithi gesture of dismissal. "You carry no rifle," she observed, walking slowly around him as if inspecting merchandise that had failed to meet basic standards. "You have no plasma blade, no neural disruptor, not even a ceremonial weapon to show that you take this duty seriously." She stopped in front of him and leaned down slightly, using her greater height to emphasize her point. "How exactly do you plan to protect me, human?" Daniel met her gaze without flinching, and something in his calm brown eyes made her pause for just a moment before she pushed the feeling aside. "By being present, Your Highness," he answered. Valara laughed. "And it was not a kind sound, being present," she repeated, looking at Makari with disbelief. "The humans have sent me a philosopher instead of a warrior." The 8 Sirathi guards, who would also be accompanying the princess, exchanged glances that suggested they shared her poor opinion of the human commander Thiessen. The leader of her personal guard stepped forward with his hand resting on the hilt of his plasma blade. "Your Highness, perhaps we should contact the Terran Alliance and request a replacement," he suggested. "Someone more suitable for a mission of this importance?" Daniel turned his attention to the commander, but said nothing. "No," Valara decided after a moment of thought. "That would be diplomatically awkward, and my father wants this summit to succeed." She waved her hand dismissively at Daniel. "The human can come along if the Terrans insist, but he will stay out of my way and try not to embarrass his species." She began walking toward the corridor that led to the royal quarters, her guards falling into formation around her with practiced precision. "I have real guards for actual protection," she added over her shoulder. "Consider yourself decorative at best." Daniel fell into step behind the group, positioning himself exactly 3 meters from the princess. If anyone had been paying close attention, they might have noticed that his footsteps made no sound on the metal flooring, despite the fact that everyone else's boots rang clearly with each step, they might have noticed how his eyes moved constantly, tracking every shadow and every maintenance hatch and every potential angle of attack along the corridor. They might have noticed how he cataloged the position and movement patterns of each Sirithi guard, identifying their strengths and weaknesses with the automatic precision of someone who had been trained to assess threats since childhood. But no one was paying close attention to Daniel Cole. That was exactly what he wanted. The diplomatic vessel was called the Sarath Kai, which meant voice of peace in the Sirithi language, and it was designed to impress visitors with the wealth and sophistication of the Dominion. The corridors were wide and decorated with flowing artwork that seemed to move and shift as you walked past. The lighting was soft and carefully designed to complement Sirithi's skin tones. Everything about the ship whispered elegance and power. Daniel memorized the layout as they walked, adding it to the mental map he had already begun constructing from the ship schematics he had studied during the shuttle flight. By the time they reached the royal quarters, he knew the location of every airlock, every maintenance tunnel, every emergency system, and every potential breach point on the vessel. He also knew that 3 members of the crew were not who they claimed to be. Their body language was wrong, too controlled and too careful for simple ship workers. They had positioned themselves at key points along the route from the docking bay, and they had watched the princess pass with an intensity that went beyond curiosity about visiting royalty. Daniel filed this information away and said nothing. Princess Valara paused at the entrance to her quarters and turned to face him one more time. You may have the small cabin at the end of this corridor, she informed him in a tone that made it clear this was a demotion from whatever arrangements had originally been planned. The guards will handle security, so do not trouble yourself with any actual responsibilities. As you wish, Your Highness, Daniel replied with another small bow. Valara studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of wounded pride or resentment, but his expression remained perfectly neutral. You really are spectacularly boring, she said finally, and then she disappeared into her quarters without waiting for a response. Commander Thiessen approached Daniel after the princess had gone. Human, he said, and the words sounded like an insult in his mouth. Stay out of our way during this mission, and perhaps we will all survive with our dignity intact. Daniel nodded politely. I understand. Commander Thiessen held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for any sign of challenge or defiance, and found nothing but bland cooperation. He snorted with contempt and walked away to organize his guards. Daniel waited until he was alone in the corridor before allowing himself a small smile. The journey to Korath Station would take 4 standard days. By the end of the first night, Daniel had completed his assessment of the ship's security, identified the 3 suspicious crew members as probable advance scouts for an assassination team, and intercepted an encrypted transmission that confirmed his suspicions. The message had been short and professional. The violet flower must not reach the garden. Assassination orders. Paid for by someone with enough resources to hire professionals. Daniel decoded the transmission, traced its origin to a dead drop on Korath Station, and began calculating how many enemies he would likely face when they arrived. The princess slept peacefully in her quarters, dreaming of diplomatic victories and blissfully unaware that her worthless human escort had already begun the work of keeping her alive. The second day of the journey passed slowly for Princess Valara, who spent most of her time in the diplomatic preparation room reviewing briefings and practicing speeches for the finest as far as upcoming summit. The neutral summit on Korath Station was supposed to establish new trade agreements between 7 major powers, and the Sirithi Dominion stood to gain significant economic advantages if the negotiations went well. Her father, Emperor Kathrani IV, had personally chosen Valara for this mission because she had inherited her mother's gift for persuasion and her father's patience for complex negotiations. It was the most important assignment of her young political career, and she intended to succeed brilliantly. The human escort was a minor annoyance that she had already dismissed from her thoughts. Daniel Cole seemed to exist in the background of every room she entered, never speaking unless spoken to, never drawing attention to himself, and never doing anything that could be considered either impressive or offensive. Ate little during meals. He spoke less when Valara asked him direct questions. He answered with short sentences that provided information without offering anything extra. On the second evening, boredom drove her to attempt an actual conversation with him. "Human," she said, not bothering to use his name, "have you ever actually protected anyone important before this assignment?" They were in the observation lounge, where large windows showed the streaking lights of faster-than-light travel. Daniel stood near the wall, watching the door, even though there was no reason to expect trouble on a secure vessel. "Yes, Your Highness," he answered. "And these important people you protected," Valara continued, settling into a comfortable chair and studying him with idle curiosity. "Did they survive your protection?" "Most of them." She waited for him to elaborate, to explain the circumstances or share stories of dramatic rescues and narrow escapes. He said nothing more. "That is not exactly a reassuring answer," she observed. Daniel turned to look at her, and for a brief moment she saw something flicker in his brown eyes. Something that might have been amusement, or might have been something else entirely. "Protection work is complicated, Your Highness," he said. "Sometimes success means the person you are guarding never knows they were in danger at all. And sometimes the danger is greater than any single protector can handle." Valara considered this answer and found it unsatisfying. "You are spectacularly uninformative," she declared. "I have met Terran diplomats who could talk for hours about nothing at all. But you seem determined to say as little as possible about everything. I apologize if my conversation disappoints you." "Your Highness, it does not disappoint me because I expected nothing from you in the first place." She stood and gathered her diplomatic tablets, preparing to return to her quarters for the evening. "Try not to get lost on the ship, human," she said as she walked past him. "It would be embarrassing to have to search for you. I will do my best." "Your Highness." What Princess Valara did not know was that Daniel had spent the previous night moving through the ship like a ghost. He had mapped every corridor and compartment from memory, tested every lock and security system, and identified the precise locations of all threats, both known and suspected. 3 crew members he had flagged as suspicious were low-level operatives, probably hired to observe and report rather than to take direct action. They communicated using a simple code hidden in routine maintenance reports, and Daniel had cracked their cipher within the first hour of observation. More concerning was the listening device he had discovered hidden in the princess's quarters. It was sophisticated technology, small enough to escape standard security sweeps and designed to transmit compressed data bursts that would be nearly impossible to detect. Someone had planted it before the voyage began, which meant the conspiracy reached into the Sirathi Dominion itself. Daniel disabled the device while the princess slept, moving through her quarters with the silence of long practice. She never stirred, never sensed his presence, never knew that an enemy had been listening to her private conversations and reading her diplomatic preparations. He destroyed the device and planted false information through the communication channels. He knew the conspirators were monitoring by morning. The assassins waiting on Korath Station would believe the princess's security detail had been reduced due to budget constraints, and that she would be traveling with only 4 guards instead of 8. They would adjust their plans accordingly. Daniel wanted them confident. Enemies made mistakes on the 3rd day. Valara noticed something that briefly caught her attention. She was walking through the ship with Commander Thiessen, discussing security arrangements for the station. When she glanced back and saw Daniel following at his usual distance, his footsteps made no sound. She stopped and turned to look at him directly. "Human," she said. "How do you move so quietly on metal flooring?" Daniel stopped as well, his expression bland and unremarkable as always. Soft-soled shoes. "Your Highness," he answered. "Standard issue for diplomatic escorts." Commander Thyssen snorted with derision. "Soft shoes," he repeated. "While my guards wear proper combat boots designed for traction and durability. The human wears slippers." Several of the nearby guards laughed at this. Valara studied Daniel for a moment longer, searching for any sign of embarrassment or anger, but found only calm patience. "Continue," she said finally, turning back toward the command center. But something about his answer had not satisfied her. She had seen Terran Marines before, had watched them drill and train during joint exercises between their species, and she could not remember any of them moving as silently as this unremarkable man in his unremarkable clothes. The thought faded quickly, pushed aside by more pressing concerns about the summit and her diplomatic objectives. That night, Daniel detected an incoming transmission aimed at a hidden receiver in the cargo bay. He intercepted and decoded it in seconds. "Package arrives tomorrow." The message read, 12 handlers confirmed. Secondary plan authorized if primary fails. 12 assassins. Daniel had expected 8. Perhaps 10. The Velkari Consortium, the rival faction that had paid for this operation, was investing heavily in the princess's death. He considered informing Commander Thyssen but dismissed the idea immediately. The Sirathi guards were competent in conventional combat, but they were not trained for this kind of threat. They would want to confront the assassins directly, which would lead to a firefight on a crowded station with countless opportunities for the princess to be caught in crossfire. Daniel needed the assassins to come to him on his terms, in conditions he could control. He spent the rest of the night preparing, studying the station layout from files he had downloaded, identifying choke points and blind spots, calculating sight lines and escape routes. By morning, he had a plan for every possible scenario. Princess Valara woke refreshed and eager for the day ahead. She had no idea that her worthless human escort had slept only 2 hours and had spent the rest of the night preparing to kill 12 professional assassins. When she saw him standing outside her door, she noted that he looked exactly the same as always. "You look tired, human," she observed without much interest. "I had difficulty sleeping, Your Highness," Daniel admitted. "Unfamiliar ship. Perhaps you should try warm milk," she suggested with faint mockery. "I understand humans find it soothing. I will consider that, Your Highness." Valara shook her head and walked past him toward the preparation room. The summit began tomorrow. Everything she had worked for was finally within reach. She never noticed the thin scars on Daniel's hands, pale lines that spoke of countless fights and countless victories, hidden in plain sight like everything else about him. Korath Station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel suspended between 3 major trade routes. A massive structure of commerce and diplomacy where a dozen different species mingled in uneasy peace. The station had been built centuries ago by a coalition of powers who needed neutral ground for negotiations. And over the years, it had grown into a sprawling maze of markets and meeting halls and residential districts. Princess Valara watched through the observation window as the Sarath Kai approached the docking ring, her skin shifting through excited shades of blue and silver as she contemplated the opportunities ahead. This was her moment, her chance to prove herself worthy of the responsibility her father had placed upon her. The summit would establish trade agreements that would benefit the Sirathi Dominion for generations, and she intended to be remembered as the diplomat who made it happen. "Your Highness," Commander Thyssen announced. "Docking procedures are complete, and the honor guard is assembled." Valara straightened her formal robes and composed her expression into one of dignified confidence. "Let us proceed," she commanded. The procession through the station was everything she had hoped it would be. Her 8 Sirathi guards formed a perfect diamond formation around her, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the station lights, and their plasma rifles held at precise angles that communicated both readiness and discipline. Station residents stopped to stare as the princess passed, recognizing the insignia of the Sirathi Dominion and whispering among themselves about the important visitor. Representatives from other delegations bowed respectfully when Valara acknowledged them, and she felt the familiar thrill of political power flowing through her interactions. This was where she belonged, at the center of great events, shaping the future of her people. Behind the formation, largely unnoticed by everyone including the princess herself, Daniel Cole walked with his small bag and his plain clothes and his forgettable face. He was counting 2 figures in maintenance uniforms near the primary corridor junction, positioned to observe without appearing suspicious. One vendor in the market district, whose food cart was placed at an angle that provided clear sightlines to multiple approach routes. 3 individuals wearing station security uniforms who did not move like real security officers, their posture too rigid and their eyes too focused on the Sirathi delegation. 4 more scattered along the route to the diplomatic quarters, pretending to be tourists or merchants or station workers, but all sharing the same careful attention to the princess's movements. And somewhere ahead, in the diplomatic quarters themselves, 2 more who had infiltrated the cleaning staff and were waiting in positions that would give them access. When the time came, 12 assassins in total, just as the intercepted transmission had promised. Daniel noted their positions, calculated their probable weapons and tactics based on their body language and positioning, and continued walking without any change in his expression. The Valkyrie Consortium had hired professionals, experienced killers who knew how to blend into crowds and wait for the perfect moment to strike. They were good at their work. Daniel had been trained by people who were better human. Valara's voice cut through his tactical assessment. He looked up to find her watching him with the familiar expression of contempt she had worn since they first met. "You seem distracted," she observed. "I hope you are not already bored with your duties." "Not at all, Your Highness," Daniel replied calmly. "I was simply admiring the station architecture." Commander Thiessen laughed sharply at this. "The human appreciates art," he said to his guards, loud enough for Daniel to hear. "Perhaps we should take him to the gallery district after the summit, assuming he does not get lost in the crowd." The guards shared the commander's amusement, and even Valara allowed herself a small smile at her escort's expense. Daniel accepted the mockery with the same blank patience he had shown throughout the journey. He was thinking about timing. The assassins would not strike in public, not with so many witnesses and so many potential complications. They would wait until the princess was in her quarters, after the welcome reception, when security would naturally relax and the guards would be tired from a long day of ceremonial duty. Standard protocol for this type of operation suggested a strike window between midnight and 4 in the morning, when biological rhythms would be at their lowest and response times would be slowest. That gave Daniel approximately 12 hours to prepare. The diplomatic quarters assigned to the Sirathi delegation were luxurious by any standard. A suite of rooms decorated in neutral colors that would not clash with any species' aesthetic sensibilities. Commander Thiessen posted guards at every entrance and conducted a thorough security sweep that found nothing out of the ordinary. The 2 assassins, hidden in the ventilation system above the princess's sleeping chamber, remained undetected, their heartbeats controlled and their breathing almost non-existent. They were very good at hiding. Daniel requested permission to inspect the interior before the princess entered, a request that earned him another round of dismissive looks from the Sirathi guards. Really human, This is excessive, Valara sighed with theatrical patience. My guards have already cleared the rooms. I understand, Your Highness, Daniel said. But Terran protection protocols require independent verification. Terran protocols, Commander Thizin repeated with a sneer. Are all humans this paranoid, or just the ones who cannot fight? We prefer to call it thorough, Commander. Valara waved her hand in tired acceptance. Fine. Conduct your inspection if it makes you feel useful. Daniel entered the quarters alone. The lights were dimmed to a comfortable level, and the air carried the faint scent of the neutralizing agents used by the cleaning staff. Most people would have noticed nothing unusual about the room. Daniel noticed everything. Slight disturbance in the dust pattern near the ventilation grate above the sleeping area. The barely perceptible sound of controlled breathing from two sources, approximately 4 meters apart. The faint heat signatures that even the most sophisticated stealth suits could not completely eliminate. He moved through the room as if conducting a routine inspection, checking corners and testing locks and examining furniture with apparent thoroughness. When he passed beneath the ventilation grate, he paused for just a moment to confirm his assessment. 2 assassins, armed with molecular blades based on the slight bulges in their suits, waiting for the princess to fall asleep before dropping silently into the room. Daniel completed his inspection and stepped back into the corridor. The room is secure, Your Highness, he announced. Valara swept past him without acknowledgement, already focused on preparing for the welcome reception that would begin in 3 hours. Commander Thiessen gave Daniel a dismissive nod and began organizing the guard rotation for the evening. Daniel walked to his own small room at the end of the corridor and closed the door behind him. He had 3 hours before the reception, and approximately 9 hours after that. Before the assassins made their move, he began preparing with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. From his small bag, he retrieved a set of tools that looked innocent enough to pass any security scan, but could be assembled into something far more dangerous. His hands moved with practiced precision, and his mind ran through scenarios and calculations with the cold clarity that came from years of training. 12 assassins waited throughout the station, confident in their numbers and their plan. They had no idea that a single human had already marked them for death. The welcome reception was held in the grand atrium of Chorus Station, a spectacular space designed to impress visitors with its soaring ceilings and elegant decoration. Representatives from 7 major powers mingled beneath floating lights that shifted color to complement each species' appearance, and the air hummed with the sound of a dozen languages being spoken simultaneously. Princess Valara moved through the crowd with natural grace, her iridescent skin glowing with pleased shades of blue and silver as she charmed diplomats and negotiators from across the galaxy. She was in her element, trading compliments and subtle negotiations with the skill of someone born to this world. The Krethvari ambassador complimented her diplomatic preparation and hinted at possible alliance adjustments. The human trade delegate expressed interest in expanding commerce between their peoples. Even the normally hostile representative from the Velkari consortium offered grudging respect for her poise and intelligence. Valar accepted each interaction with gracious confidence, never showing the excitement she felt at the opportunities opening before her. This summit could change everything for the Sirathi Dominion, and she was exactly where she needed to be to make it happen. Daniel Cole stood near the wall throughout the reception, holding a glass of something that looked like wine, but that he never actually drank. His eyes moved constantly, tracking the assassins who had positioned themselves around the atrium with professional care. The 2 in maintenance uniforms had found positions near the service entrances. The fake security officers had spread out to cover the main exits. The vendor from the market district was now dressed as a server, carrying a tray of refreshments that brought him close to the princess every few minutes. They were patient. These killers, content to watch and wait for the opportunity they knew would come. Daniel watched them watching Valara, and he calculated the primary strike would come tonight in the quarters, using the 2 assassins already in position above the sleeping chamber. If that failed, the remaining 10 would attempt a secondary approach, probably using gas to neutralize the guards before moving in with silent weapons. The consortium had invested significant resources in this operation, which meant they expected significant returns. Valar's death would destabilize the summit negotiations and weaken the Sirithi Dominion's position in regional politics. It was cold, practical calculation of the kind that drove most political assassinations. Daniel understood cold calculation very well. At precisely midnight station time, Princess Valara announced her intention to retire for the evening. She had made excellent progress at the reception, establishing relationships that would serve her well during the formal negotiations beginning tomorrow. And she wanted to review her notes before sleeping. Commander Thiessen assembled the guard formation for the walk back to the diplomatic quarters, his soldiers falling into position with practiced efficiency. Daniel followed at his usual distance. Ignored by everyone as usual, the corridors were quieter now, most of the station's residents having retired for the night cycle, and their footsteps echoed softly against the metal flooring. The assassins had repositioned during the reception, moving to intercept points along the secondary routes in case the guards chose an unexpected path. Daniel tracked their movements through subtle signs that would have been invisible to anyone without his training. A shadow that lingered too long in a doorway, a reflection that moved against the light, a sound that did not quite match the ambient noise of the station. They were converging, preparing for the moment when their targets would be vulnerable. When they reached the diplomatic quarters, Valara paused at the entrance to her sleeping chamber. "Commander, I will require privacy for the remainder of the night," she announced. "Post your guards at the main entrances and do not disturb me unless there is an emergency." "Yes, Your Highness," Thiessen replied with a formal bow. Valara glanced at Daniel, who stood quietly at the edge of the corridor. "You as well, human," she added. "Try to get some sleep tonight, instead of wandering the halls with your soft shoes." "As you wish, Your Highness." She disappeared into her chambers, and the guards took their positions throughout the suite. Daniel walked to his small room and closed the door. He waited exactly 30 minutes, tracking the sounds of the guards settling into their routine and listening for any indication that the assassins above the princess were preparing to move. At 12:30, he opened his door silently and moved into the corridor. The first guard he passed did not see him. The second guard did not hear him. Daniel flowed through the spaces between shadows like water, approaching the princess's chambers through a route he had memorized. During his earlier inspection, he disabled the lock without triggering any alarms and slipped inside. The room was dark and quiet. Valara slept peacefully in the large bed, her breathing slow and regular, her skin shifting through the soft colors of pleasant dreams above her. Hidden in the ventilation shaft, 2 assassins waited with the patience of predators. Daniel moved beneath the shaft without making a sound. The first assassin died before he knew he was in danger. A precise strike to the base of his skull that ended consciousness instantly. Daniel caught the body as it fell, lowering it silently to the floor. The second assassin managed a half-second of awareness, just enough time to recognize that something had gone terribly wrong before the same fate claimed him. 2 down. Daniel checked both bodies quickly, confirming their weapons and removing anything that might identify their employers. Then he repositioned them in the ventilation shaft, arranging the scene to suggest they had killed each other in a dispute over payment. Assassins were notoriously unreliable, and such conflicts were not uncommon in their profession. he slipped out of the princess's chambers as silently as he had entered, leaving Valara sleeping undisturbed. She never knew he had been there at 3 in the morning. The remaining assassins made their move. They came in coordinated teams, approaching from 4 directions with the synchronized precision of professionals who had worked together many times before. Gas canisters neutralized the Sirithi guards within seconds. The sophisticated compound designed to incapacitate without triggering biological alarms. Commander Thiessen slumped against the wall, unconscious before he could draw his weapon. His soldiers fell one by one, victims of an attack they never saw coming. The assassins moved through the corridors like shadows, converging on the princess's chambers with molecular knives drawn and neural disruptors ready. They found Daniel waiting for them. The first 2 came from the primary corridor, moving fast and low with their weapons extended. Daniel stepped between them and struck twice, his hands moving with speed that seemed to blur in the dim light. They fell without making a sound, their throats opened by their own molecular blades. 3 more emerged from a secondary entrance, and they lasted slightly longer. One managed to raise his disruptor before Daniel broke his arm and turned the weapon against his companions. 4 seconds total for all 3. The remaining 5 realized something had gone wrong and attempted to regroup in the central corridor. Daniel was already among them. He moved like something from a nightmare, flowing from one target to the next with movements that seemed almost casual despite their lethal precision. Bones broke with quiet snaps, arteries opened with the whisper of sharp edges through flesh. Bodies fell and did not rise. 12 assassins, 17 seconds from first contact to last. Daniel stood in the corridor surrounded by the dead, his breathing calm and controlled, his expression unchanged from the bland patience he had worn throughout the voyage. His hands were steady, his heart rate was normal. He had been trained by humans who had turned the art of killing into mathematics, and he had executed the equation perfectly. He cleaned his hands with a cloth from his pocket and began the work of repositioning the bodies to minimize the scene the princess would encounter. In the morning, the Sirithi guards would wake in a few hours with headaches and confusion, but no permanent damage. They would never know how close they had come to failing in their duty. Daniel Cole finished his work and returned to his small room at the end of the corridor. He had approximately 3 hours until morning. He used 2 of them to sleep. Princess Valara Kethrani woke to the soft chime of her morning alarm, feeling more rested than she had in days. The comfortable bed and the quiet darkness of the diplomatic quarters had provided exactly the peaceful sleep she needed before the first day of summit negotiations. She stretched luxuriously and rose to begin her morning preparations, her mind already turning to the diplomatic challenges ahead. The Krethvari would push for resource concessions that she was not authorized to grant. The human delegation would want technology exchange agreements that her father's council had already rejected. The Volcari consortium would attempt to undermine every proposal she made, as they always did when Sirithi interests were at stake. It would be a difficult day, but Valara felt ready. She felt confident. She felt like a princess of the Sirithi Dominion should feel on the morning of her greatest diplomatic challenge. When she emerged from her sleeping chamber, she found Daniel Cole standing outside her door. His clothes were the same unremarkable garments he had worn since boarding the Seraph K's. Expression was the same bland patience. She had grown accustomed to ignoring everything about him. Appeared exactly as it had the day before. "Good morning, Your Highness," he said with his customary small bow. "Good morning, human," Valara replied, glancing around the corridor with a slight frown. "Where are my guards?" She had expected Commander Thiessen to be waiting with a full security briefing, but the corridor seemed unusually empty. They experienced some technical difficulties during the night, Daniel explained calmly. Replacement personnel will arrive within the hour. Technical difficulties? Valara repeated, her frown deepening. What kind of technical difficulties? A gas leak in the ventilation system caused temporary incapacitation, Daniel said. All guards are recovering in the medical bay and should return to duty by midday. Something in his voice made her pause. She looked at him more carefully than she had since their first meeting, studying his unremarkable face and his ordinary brown eyes for any sign of what he was not telling her. She noticed, for the first time, a thin scratch on the back of his left hand. It had not been there the previous evening. What happened last night, human? She asked slowly. Nothing of concern, Your Highness, Daniel replied. The situation was managed. Valara felt her skin shift through uncertain colors as her instincts told her that something significant had occurred while she slept. That scratch on your hand, she said, pointing at the mark. Where did that come from? Daniel glanced down at his hand as if noticing the injury for the first time. A minor accident during my evening inspection. Your Highness, he said. Nothing worth discussing. I am the Princess of the Sarathi Dominion, Valara said firmly. And I am asking you directly what happened last night. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing, then something shifted in his expression. A subtle change that transformed his unremarkable face into something harder and more focused. There were 12 assassins positioned throughout the station, he said quietly. They were hired by the Volcari Consortium to kill you before the summit could begin. Valara felt her blood turn cold. 12 assassins, she repeated. 2 infiltrated your quarters before our arrival and hid in the ventilation system above your sleeping chamber. Daniel continued in the same calm voice. The other 10 used gas to neutralize your guards and attempted to reach you through the corridor network. And you stopped them, Valara said, not quite making it a question. Yes, Your Highness. All 12 of them. Yes, Your Highness. Valara's skin shifted to pale silver. The Sarathi expression of profound shock. She had heard stories of Terran soldiers, of course, had seen recordings of their military capabilities during joint exercises, but she had always assumed those stories were exaggerated. Propaganda designed to make the young species seem more formidable than they actually were, without alerting anyone? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, without any evidence of combat except that scratch on your hand. I try to be thorough, Your Highness, Daniel said. And there was nothing bland or unremarkable about the way he said it. Valara thought about the nights they had traveled together, the countless hours when she had dismissed him as useless and boring and unworthy of her attention. She thought about how he had watched every shadow and every doorway while she mocked his soft shoes. She thought about how he had asked to inspect her quarters before she entered, and how she had treated his caution as a joke. I owe you an apology, she said finally, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I judged you harshly without understanding what I was looking at. You saw what I wanted you to see. Your Highness, Daniel replied. So did the assassins. That is the point, Valara realized suddenly. You look harmless so that your enemies will underestimate you. The most dangerous predators rarely announce themselves. Your Highness, Valara shook her head slowly, still trying to process what she had learned. I have met warriors from 100 different worlds, she said. Soldiers who wear their deadliness like ceremonial armor, advertising their capabilities to everyone they meet. She gestured at Daniel's plain clothes and forgettable face. But you look like nothing at all. That is the highest compliment my teachers ever gave their students, Daniel said, and for the first time since they had met, she saw something that might have been humor in his expression. The summit lasted 3 more days, and throughout the negotiations, Princess Valara found herself seeing Daniel Cole differently. He still stood in the background, still wore unremarkable clothes, still spoke only when necessary, but now she noticed the way his eyes tracked every person who entered the room now she recognized. The careful positioning that kept him within striking distance of any potential threat. Now she understood that the blandest human in any gathering might be the most dangerous person present. The negotiations concluded successfully, with trade agreements that exceeded even her father's optimistic projections. The Valkyrie Consortium's attempts to undermine her proposals failed repeatedly, perhaps because their usual sources of information had been mysteriously eliminated before the summit began. When the Sarath Kai departed Kara Station, Valara summoned Daniel to her private office for a conversation she had been preparing for days. "The Terran Alliance will expect a report on your performance," she said. "I intend to request that you be assigned to all future Sirathi diplomatic missions." Daniel inclined his head slightly. "That is very generous." "Your Highness, it is not generosity," Valara corrected him. "It is practical recognition of exceptional competence." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "When we arrive home, my father will ask about the human escort who accompanied me to Korath Station. What will you tell him, Your Highness?" Valara considered the question seriously. She could tell her father everything, could explain in detail how Daniel had saved her life and eliminated 12 professional assassins without raising an alarm, but something told her that publicity was not what Daniel Cole wanted or needed. "I will tell him that you were adequate," she said finally, "and that he should request you specifically for any future missions requiring Terran protection." Daniel's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes suggested appreciation. "Thank you, Your Highness, and the compensation you receive for this assignment should be increased significantly," Valara added. "I will ensure my father's treasurer receives appropriate instructions." "That is unnecessary, Your Highness." "It is entirely necessary," Valara insisted. "Some debts cannot be fully repaid, but that does not excuse us from making the attempt." She walked to the window and looked out at the stars streaming past. "I spent our entire journey dismissing you as worthless because you did not match my expectations of what a protector should look like. Many people make that mistake, Your Highness, and I suspect many of them are no longer alive to learn from it," Valara said quietly. She turned back to face him. "I have learned something important during this mission, human," she said. "Something my father tried to teach me years ago that I never truly understood until now." "What is that, Your Highness?" Valara's skin shifted through thoughtful shades of purple and gold as she considered how to express what she had realized. "Some worth cannot be measured by what we see," she said finally. "The most valuable things are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize them." Daniel Cole, the unremarkable human escort who had killed 12 assassins without a sound, offered her a small bow. "You are wise beyond your years, Your Highness," he said, and Princess Valara Kathrani, who had learned to look more carefully at the universe around her, suspected that was the highest compliment he had ever given anyone.